A Confessor of Christ. When he was feeling better, Nicolae continues, Valeriu spoke beautifully and with fervor, focusing mainly on his favorite subject, interior purification and union with Christ. He used to say, through baptism, we received purifying grace, and when anointed with holy chrism, we have been adorned with all the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But this blessed internal state is dormant within us. We are Christians in name only. We live in a world of confusion, of loose morals, of sin. It is considered shameful to be a believer, old-fashioned to be moral. The baptized man, in order to be saved, has to live all his life in the Holy Spirit, but we have not succeeded in doing this. We have believed, we have prayed, we have kept the faith, we have suffered, but in order to be united with Christ, one must purify oneself inwardly through confession and renew oneself through Holy Communion. Therefore, unite yourself to Christ conscientiously and with great steadfastness, making yourself a bearer of His holiness, His power, His love, His light, His immortality. You must oppose sin mercilessly, then you will be born anew. There is no path of compromise. Another time he said to us, the teaching of Christ is so wonderful, so consummate, that if we understand it, we have the most powerful argument possible for the existence of God. When I had this revelation, I wept from pain and from happiness. Those who believe in Him must bear witness to this truth even if it means being martyred. Was not the Son of God killed as an enemy of His people? The seed that He scattered brought forth fruit. Day by day, people drew ever closer and ever more sincerely to Christ, who became the source and guide of their lives and their thoughts. One day, Valeriu was feeling so ill that we thought he was going to die. In addition to all the other illnesses from which he suffered from, he also developed acute appendicitis. He could have been left to die, but that would not have been humanitarian. Humanitarianism is the hypocrisy of cruelty. It brings to light the poisonous and lamentable domain of the communist revolution, with its slogans and beautiful vestments. The doctor sent a report to prison administration so that he could be transported to the hospital in town for an operation. The penitentiary political agent of the prison came to him and said, "Your life is in my hands. If you do not have this operation, you will die." Valeriu smiled indulgently and answered, "If one man's life depends on another, then this man indeed has great responsibility. But if everyone would realize that their lives depend on God, then everyone would value the life of his neighbor." "You're crazy," the agent said to him, and sent him to the operating room under strict guard. When he came back to the sanatorium, the agent said to him, "Look, you were face to face with death. You see, we wanted to show you that your life is in our hands. Maybe now you will have changed your mind and you will cooperate with us. We will give you streptomycin. You will also get packages from your family. And you who knows what might happen later. You are an intelligent man and you could be useful to us. We know that you are not interested in politics, but in religion, but are not the patriarch and all of his priests on our side now? Why do you not join our side too? You have a lot to gain. I thank you that you allowed me to have the operation. From now on, my torments will go on even longer. As for the rest, between you and me there is the matter of conscience. For the sake of my spiritual freedom I have decided to die. It is good that the truth be told plainly, and I serve the truth. I am not the judge of others, but a confessor of God. There is nothing under the sun that can survive without God. You do not want to accept Christ. I cannot accept spiritual death. I told you already that you are crazy," shouted the agent. "I'm going to file a report. You are a reactionary, a fascist, an enemy of the people, in the service of American bandits. We know how to deal with people like you. You're only fit to die. Go and die with your Christ. I won't be stopped either by him nor by somebody like you. You can kill me now, but no one can kill him any longer. He is the stumbling block for all pride. Understand well that Christ is the only power that can deliver mankind from suffering and sin. Give up all this nonsense. The truth is on our side. The truth is love that sacrifices itself for the poor and the persecuted. Look here, you are staring death straight in the face and you're giving me mystical sermons? You want to convince me too? See, now you have gone too far. You have spread yourself too thin." Valeriu struggled to keep looking at him, because his eyelids had grown heavy. He felt worn out physically, but an internal joy compelled him to speak about faith in order to leave an eternal testimony. The smile of his measureless love blossomed on his cheeks. He prayed in secret for this unhappy man and for God to deliver the world from leaders like him. The agent was confused, muddled. He swore a blue streak and then ordered that Valeriu be taken back to his rooms. "You cannot say that I didn't behave decently, humanely with you," the agent later added. "I offered you life, but you want death. To hell with this. Who the hell can understand all this?" This is how they parted company. After that, the agent never bothered him again, but he took long looks at him whenever he came back into the room. Valeriu realized that he would never get anything from the agents, but he took it upon himself to say to them, "There are very valuable people here who can be of use to the country, but they are dying because they have neither streptomycin nor news from their families. You can save them." But the agents did not want to save them. In their belief system, the individual man did not matter, because any man could be replaced with another. What counted was the system. The ideas of these prisoners undermined the system, so their prison sentences were permanent. Valeriu had a discussion regarding this issue only one other time, with an inspector from Bucharest. The inspector stopped at Valeriu's bed and asked him, "What's your name, prisoner?" "Sutrates, Mr. Inspector. I am Valeriu Gafencu," he responded, using the required greeting. "Aha," said the inspector, looking at him sternly. "Mr. Inspector, we ask that you grant us the same rights as those that the communist prisoners used to have." "We will not repeat the mistakes of the past," answered the inspector dryly. "Our humanitarianism does not apply to reactionaries." "Mr. Inspector," continued Valeriu, "the men here are sick, powerless. Every day, one of us dies. Besides this, we are subjected to threats of terror and torture. How dare you speak to me that way? We don't want to turn you into heroes. At best, we will make you informers, and your wives and sisters into prostitutes." Valeriu was deeply pained and answered, "The sins of this world have to be atoned for. We, prisoners here, we are atoning for many sins. All of us, however, are in the hands of God." "You are a mystic bandit. You will die here. Do not think for one moment that you will get out alive. Even though you are sickly now, you too will be forced to undergo re-education." "The way I am is an advantage," answered Valeriu, "because I will not be able to last for long. A few blows will be enough to finish me." "Go to hell," shouted the inspector. "We will make sure that you will die slowly, painfully, until you give up the Christ that you're trying to scare us with. We hate him, and you, and all of you. We're going to destroy you all. Here there is no more Christ, dead or resurrected. We'll see to it that future generations do not know his lies or yours. We ourselves are the Christs of this world. May God forgive you," answered Valeriu, and lowered his head in prayer, expecting to hear an order that he be crushed to pieces. But he was not killed then. His toil continued for a while longer. They gave him gall, and you give me honey? One day, during an inspection, a zealous jailer confiscated the cushion that Valeriu used to lean on. Another, being more humane, took the cushion out of the things which had been confiscated and discreetly gave it back. Between those two souls, there was a moment of vibrant spiritual power. After the inspection was over, Valeriu thought it would be best to give the cushion to Traian, who could move only with difficulty and had bed sores. Traian did not want to accept it and gave it to Gheorghe. Gheorghe gave it to someone else until, finally, the cushion came back to Valeriu, given to him by someone who did not know where it had come from. Valeriu considered it to be a sign that the pillow was given to him by God. During this time, Valeriu confessed and received Holy Communion regularly. His spiritual father was an ordinary priest, but one who had discerned his deep inner spirituality. "I am impressed," he confided to us after Valeriu's death. His confession was always a detailed examination, a fine discernment of spirits, and a proof of his steadfastness to the highest degree of Christian living. Although he did not confess sins but rather experiences, some more lofty than others, nevertheless he humbled himself harshly. He said to me, "I don't want to have even a moment of doubt, so that Satan will not come at that moment to claim my soul." Even though he suffered a lot, he was full of mystical joy. His prayer was an uninterrupted sigh, an unextinguished longing, a ceaseless union with Christ. He could never accept even the slightest alteration or compromise of the truth. His judgment was just and sincere. Christ was alive in him. On another day, however, Gheorghe, a bony peasant who had once been a mountain of a man, confronted him and said, "It suits you that you are the only one who gets attention and you pretend to be a saint. Why doesn't anyone bring me meat? Why do people not look after me the way they do with you?" "Brother," Valeriu told him, "because of my negligence, I was a stumbling block for you. I ask you to forgive me. I will do everything I can to ease your suffering." And Valeriu asked us then to leave him alone, to go to Gheorghe more often, and to do everything we could to help him. Gheorghe was a peasant whose family had defended their land for generations. He had been at the canal, where he always exceeded the quota for an extra bowl of soup. That is how he had contracted tuberculosis. Now he was on the verge of death. Although there was no longer anything medical that could be done for him, we were at his side day after day. He wanted very much to live and loved his children and his homestead with a robust vigor. He changed, however, during the last days of his life. He reconciled himself with the idea of death, and his soul became kind and good. "Forgive me, I was possessed by Satan," he said to Valeriu. "I wanted to live, and I was horrified at the thought of dying. What I did was not right. It was not good. I am dying with the faith in the God of our fathers. These communist scoundrels have defiled the world. May they be damned." And he died. From then on, Valeriu was careful to never be a cause of trouble for anyone, even if unintentionally. I remember how Valeriu, when he needed to urinate during the night, waited until someone else called the orderly so as not to disturb him from the armchair in which he rested, even though waiting for this to happen caused him great discomfort, even pain. Such spiritual grace and kindness. In the summer of 1951, in addition to the tuberculosis he suffered from, he developed acute appendicitis. He couldn't have an operation at the sanatorium because of the lack of proper instruments and sterility necessary for an abdominal operation. With difficulty, Dr. Danielescu obtained permission for him to be transported to the hospital in town. The surgeon anesthetized him and performed the operation. The nurse who stood by his head noticed that he was perspiring heavily, but concluded that this was caused by his lung disease. At the end of the operation, in a faint voice, Valeriu said to the doctor, "Doctor, I was conscious when you operated on me." The doctor, surprised, told Valeriu to raise one of his legs, and when he saw that he was able to do so, he realized that the anesthetic had not taken effect and that the operation had been performed with Valeriu still conscious. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have given you a local anesthetic and you would not have felt a thing. How did you endure so much pain?" This incident made a great impression on those present. With tears in her eyes, the nurse gave Valeriu a handkerchief on the sly. Shortly after the operation, he was packed into a sort of cart with 2 wheels and, jolting along the pavement, was brought back to the sanatorium. After he got back, he confessed to me that the journey home was horrible. Also, during the summer of that same year, one afternoon, Valeriu had a critical episode of atrial fibrillation, along with all of its consequences. We discussed the matter among ourselves and decided to administer a dose of strophantine with glucose, the only major heart medication we had at our disposal. We all waited to see some result, but we did not observe any change in the rhythm of his heartbeat, even though normally the effect of this medication is almost instantaneous. Since closing time was near and I was on night duty, we made a joint decision to administer yet another dose after closing time, even though none of us believed he would survive the crisis. He was cyanotic, his eyes were closed, and his hand was on his cross. He was probably praying. I was convinced that only a miracle could save him. After we administered the second dose, I took his pulse again, but again there was no change. About a half hour later, I was called by another patient in an adjacent room, where I remained for 15 to 20 minutes. When I came back, I looked at Valeriu from a distance. I was convinced that he had died. He was no longer cyanotic, but he had his usual wax-like complexion. I was afraid that this was the pallid tone of a corpse. I ran up to him, and when I took his pulse, it was normal. I could not believe it, but it was true. The miracle had happened. He opened his eyes and looked at me, smiling serenely, as if nothing had happened. I dissolved some sugar in water and gave it to him to drink. It was the only way to help his tired heart. After he drank it, He looked at me with that unique look in his intense blue eyes and said, "They gave him gall, and you give me honey?" Everyone loved him and respected him. Even the prison administration was impressed by this powerful personality. The so-called re-educated did not dare look him in the eye, especially since they did not work, even though Valeriu would have shown them the same Christian love that he did to all the others. I had many discussions with him, and we often found ourselves contradicting each other. I took up the position of the fighter with a sword in hand, while Valeriu that of a dignified Christian attitude and an immense love for one's neighbor as well as one's enemies. In his heart, there was no room for hatred. He convinced me that the most powerful weapon in the struggle against evil is love for one's neighbor, but this was after I had experienced it on my own, and I remained far below the spiritual level attained by those who are called to it. Valeriu was one of those. Valeriu's prayer and the example of his life worked imperceptibly in the souls of those around him. An example. One day, R took a few puffs off of a cigarette stub that he had found in the courtyard. Valeriu saw him and said, "How will you be able to endure the great trials we are engaged in if you can't even resist a cigarette?" For R, a young student who was well-educated as he was well-intentioned, this admonition was enough to make him begin to seriously consider the notion of Christian living and inner striving. Before then, I had not taken any interest in problems of conscience, he later confessed. I owe my true turning to Christ to Valeriu. He revealed to me not only the depths of my own soul, but also a proper orientation toward life and the world. About a year later, Valeriu was preparing himself for confession and communion. For the sake of humility and in order that nothing escape him, he called R to come and help him. "R, I ask you to be honest with me. Have I done something wrong?" "You haven't done anything wrong, and I don't want you to do anything wrong now either. I ask you then, with all spiritual freedom and without sparing me for any reason, to tell me about anything bad or unsuitable that you find in me, either in word or in deed. Tell me with all spiritual freedom and without sparing me for any reason." R was amazed. He had not expected such a request. Therefore, he answered, "In other words, I am to be your judge? You're asking me to do something beyond my power. I only know that for me you have always been an example to follow. I hope that you won't doubt my sincerity." Valeriu lowered his gaze and listened, absorbed in thought. "Even if you don't see my sins," he said, "there are eyes who do see them. I ask you then to go to 10 people and ask them sincerely what they see that is bad in me. Then come back and tell me what they said, without fear. You're asking a lot from me, but if that's what you want, I'll do it." After some time, he came back and said nobody had anything to say. "Nevertheless," Valeriu insisted, "it can't be that no one had any criticism of me." R hesitated for a moment. Valeriu saw it and didn't let him stifle it. "Tell me everything. Why should you hide anything?" "I'm not hiding anything, but I don't know if it's worthwhile to tell you about an unfair judgment from a man who is spiritually weak." "Tell me," Valeriu insisted. "It's about X. He's not too keen on helping those in room number 4, and the generosity the others exhibit towards those seriously ill probably troubles his conscience and gives him all kinds of impure thoughts. He thinks that you ought to do some small things on your own rather than expecting others who are sick themselves to do them for you." Valeriu was a bit saddened, but he wasn't troubled. "From now on I am going to try to eat by myself," he said, "to take my medications by myself, to take care of my bedpan. But more than that, I want all of you to believe me when I say this. There is not much more that I can do. I always have before me in the most vivid way your great capacity for sacrifice. I do not have any way to repay you, but God will give you reward upon reward." R then regretted that he had spoken so sincerely. "That cannot be," he said to Valeriu. "I made a mistake telling you the judgment of a foolish man. He thinks immaturely. No one, not even God, thinks he is correct in this. You can't take him seriously. Give up this idea of managing by yourself, otherwise you will grieve us." Valeriu looked at him with love and pain. Things remained as they had been because, try as he might, Valeriu was incapable of the effort necessary for even the smallest of his needs. His friends continued to help him, while he repaid them by bestowing the gifts of his soul on them. When I arrived at Târgu Ocna, I had the great fortune of being housed in the same room as Valeriu Gafencu. It was the room allocated for the more seriously ill. 4 of the chambermaids were permanently confined to bed. The other 2, in somewhat better condition, sought to be of assistance to the other 4, as far as our physical and spiritual strength permitted. During the long winter evenings and nights, Valeriu called us to come and sit beside him in order to exchange our thoughts about our Christian conscience. On one such evening, he asked me the most profound and essential question to me, which left its mark on my life forever. "What do you believe is the fundamental goal of life?" he said. I tried hard to formulate an answer that would be as rich as possible in content, but I don't think I succeeded in capturing the essence of the truth. "I consider that the primary goal of our lives," Valeriu answered, "must be to continually prepare for the day of Christian resurrection, when all peoples and nations will appear before the supreme judgment, with their good deeds and their sins, seeking to find their proper place in the heavenly dwellings." Maybe I had previously heard such things or other similar, but they had passed over me like water passes over stones. But the way that Valeriu expressed it, with that thrilling vibration in his voice and the heavenly depth of his look, shook me spiritually and altered my spiritual state for the rest of my life. Valeriu's condition worsened. Because of the long months he had spent in bed without moving and because of weakness and inadequate blood circulation, large bed sores appeared on his body, covering a large part of his back, thighs, and shanks, which were impossible to heal. Other patients in such condition would groan, curse, and revolt, because the pain of the wounds was truly horrible. But I never heard Valeriu complaining, even though on his face one could read pronounced suffering. Tears came to his eyes while prisoners like Ioan Ghițilescu, Niforito, and Aristide Lifa, who were also medical trainees, bandaged him for hours on end with brotherly love. From scraps of torn shirts, they fashioned bandages to cover the sores, but lacking necessary medicinal balms, the scraps stuck to the wounds and produced terrible pain when they were removed. Not one groan could be heard from Valeriu's lips, but on one occasion, beads of sweat covered his arched forehead. The doctors noticed. It was a sign that his patience had reached its limit. They stopped for a while and left him alone to recover.